Welcome to HOA Karma Files. The HOA treated receipts like contraband. I will not be talked over, I said, but Judith was already waving a clipboard in a clear sleeve, like she was directing traffic at a crime scene. She shouted that the management company would back her because nobody wanted paperwork. Her pink blazer was soaked at the shoulders from the drizzle, and she kept clicking a pen in her other hand like she was timing my compliance. I stood in the hardware store parking lot with my arms crossed, work gloves tucked under one elbow, and tried not to let my voice crack. Summit Ridge Association had sent me a violation notice 3 days ago for parking a work van overnight in my driveway, and the notice cited a complaint from 2 months prior that I had never heard about until now. I manage a restaurant with long evening shifts, and I had been covering doubles all week. Missing a day could end my contract with the supplier audit coming up. Judith kept insisting I was a repeat offender, but I had never gotten a first notice. "The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I," she said, snapping the clipboard against her thigh. "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." I bit down on my next sentence and pulled out my phone instead. A neighbor named Marcus was standing a few feet away with his arms crossed and a smirk, watching Judith work herself into a frenzy. He had been around Summit Ridge longer than most of us, and he told me later he had seen this routine before. I asked Judith to show me the original complaint from 2 months ago. She flipped through the clipboard and pointed to a printed form with my address at the top, but the signature line was blank and the date was handwritten in a different ink than the rest of the text. I took a photo of it. Judith noticed and stepped closer. "You are not allowed to photograph HOA documents without board approval," she said. I asked her where that rule was written. She did not answer, just clicked her pen 3 more times and told me the fine was $250 and I had until Friday to pay or the case would go to a hearing. That gave me 2 days. The drizzle was getting heavier, and a contractor in a truck nearby rolled down his window to watch. Summit Ridge is the kind of community where contractors get harassed like criminals, so he probably figured this was routine entertainment. Judith turned to leave, but I called after her. "If you have paperwork, I want a copy of the complaint log with timestamps." Official records. She stopped and turned around slowly. Her retractable badge reel swung against her blazer. "The management company portal is down," she said. "You will have to submit a written request and wait 30 days. I told her that was not how public records worked in Minnesota. She smiled and said the HOA bylaws override state law in private communities. I knew that was wrong, but I also knew she was counting on me not having time to fight it. I had to be at work in 2 hours, and the supplier audit was Monday. I did not have 30 days. I went home and opened my laptop. The HOA portal was not down. It was just showing an error message whenever I tried to access compliance records. I screenshotted the error and emailed the management company directly. Then I pulled up the neighborhood group chat and scrolled back 2 months. Someone had posted that I was a repeat offender, and they cited a past incident that never happened to me. The post was from an account I did not recognize, but the timestamp matched the date on Judith's handwritten complaint form. I took another screenshot. Then I started digging. Summit Ridge had a cold case from 3 years ago that nobody liked to talk about. A homeowner named Elena had been fined for unapproved landscaping, and the HOA had threatened to put a lien on her house. Elena fought it and eventually got the fine dropped, but she moved out 6 months later. I remembered hearing about it when I first moved in, but I never got the full story. Now I was wondering if Judith had been involved. I searched the neighborhood chat archives for Elena's name and found a thread from that year. Multiple neighbors said they had been pressured to sign complaints against her, and one of them said the complaints were printed on identical forms with pre-filled dates. I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring and said he had been waiting for my call. He told me Judith had done the same thing to Elena, right down to the missing complaint log and the 30-day delay. Elena had tried to get the records, but the management company kept losing her request packets. By the time she finally got copies, the hearing had already happened and the fine was upheld. Marcus said he had kept his own records from that time because he knew something was wrong, but he never had a reason to use them until now. I asked him what he had. He said he had a copy of the original complaint form against Elena, and it was identical to the one Judith showed me today, including the blank signature line and the mismatched ink. He also had a screenshot of the neighborhood chat post from that year, and it was from the same mystery account that posted about me 2 months ago. He said he would bring everything over tonight. I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened a new document and started building a timeline. If Judith had framed Elena 3 years ago and was using the same playbook now, then there had to be more clues in the records. I just needed to find them before Friday. Marcus showed up at 8 with a manila envelope. Inside were printouts, screenshots, and a handwritten note from Elena that she had given him before she moved. The note said she believed Judith had backdated the landscaping complaint to make it look like Alana had ignored multiple warnings, but Alana had never received any warnings. The complaint forms were printed on HOA letterhead with a template layout, and the dates were always handwritten in the same blue ink. Marcus had highlighted the dates on his copies, and they matched the ink style on my form exactly. I spread everything out on my kitchen table and took photos of each page. Then I cross-referenced the timestamps. The neighborhood chat posts about Elena and about me were both made at 11:47 p.m., exactly 2 months before each respective hearing date. The mystery account had only ever made those 2 posts and nothing else. I checked the account profile and found it was created the same day as the first post 3 years ago, which meant someone had set it up specifically to seed fake complaints into the community record. The rule Judith kept quoting about overnight work vehicles was listed in the Summit Ridge rules as a discretionary enforcement item, meaning the board could choose whether to enforce it based on community impact. But the complaint forms made it sound like a strict violation with automatic fines. I pulled up the official bylaws and found the section. The rule said the board must provide written notice and allow 14 days for compliance before issuing a fine. Judith had skipped that step entirely. I did not chase her accusations because I already had the receipts. Now I just needed to figure out how to use them. The next morning, I drove to the management company office. It was in a strip mall 20 minutes away, and the receptionist told me the records coordinator was out until Monday. I said I needed copies of my compliance file today because I had a hearing on Friday. She looked uncomfortable and said the portal downtime had caused a backlog. I asked if I could pay for expedited copies. She said the fee was $75 and it would still take 3 business days. I told her that was unacceptable and asked to speak to a manager. She picked up the phone and dialed, then put me on hold. While I waited, I looked around the lobby. There was a file cart near the back wall with stacks of folders, and I could see Summit Ridge labels on some of them. The cart was unlocked and unattended. I made a mental note. The manager came out and introduced himself as Dan. He was tired and apologetic, and he said the portal crash had wiped some of the access logs, so they were rebuilding compliance files manually. I asked him how a professional management company could lose records twice in 3 years. He blinked and asked what I meant. I told him about Elena's case. He said he was not with the company 3 years ago, but he would look into it. I said I wanted my file today, and I was willing to pay the fee. He said he would make an exception and have someone pull it within the hour. I thanked him and sat down in the lobby. While I waited, I watched the receptionist leave her desk twice, and both times she left the file cart unattended. I did not touch it, but I memorized the label format. An hour later, Dan brought me a thin folder with 3 pages inside. One was the violation notice I had already received. The second was a copy of the complaint form with the blank signature line. The third was a printout of an email from Judith to the management company requesting enforcement action, dated the same day as the mystery chat post. I asked Dan if there were any earlier warnings in my file. He said no, this was the first entry. I asked him if that was normal. He said it depended on the board's interpretation of the bylaws. I paid the $75 and left. In my car, I called a tow yard clerk I knew from a supplier delivery mix-up last year. His name was Greg, and he worked dispatch for the company Summit Ridge used for violation tows. I asked him if the HOA had ever called about my address. He put me on hold and came back 2 minutes later. He said there was a call logged 2 weeks ago requesting a standby tow authorization for my address, but it was canceled the same day. I asked him who canceled it. He said the caller ID showed Summit Ridge HOA, but the cancellation note said the board had decided to issue a warning first. I thanked Greg and asked him to email me a copy of the call log. He said he could not do that without a subpoena. I asked him if he could confirm the details on speaker if I called him during a meeting. He laughed and said he would think about it. I drove home and added the new evidence to my timeline. Judith had requested a tow 2 weeks ago, then canceled it and backdated a complaint to make it look like I had been violating the rule for 2 months. The neighborhood chat post was planted to create a paper trail, and the complaint form was printed with a blank signature so she could claim community support without actually having any. The whole scheme was designed to pressure me into paying the fine before I had time to investigate. But she had done it before, and Elena had the same evidence 3 years ago. That meant Judith had a pattern, and the management company had enabled it by losing records and delaying requests. I needed to figure out who else knew. I called Elena. Marcus had given me her number, and she picked up on the third ring. She was cautious at first, but when I told her what Judith was doing to me, she opened up. She said Judith had framed her by pressuring neighbors to sign pre-printed complaint forms, then submitting only the blank ones to the management company so there was no way to verify who actually complained. Elena had tried to get the signed versions through a records request, but the management company kept losing her packets. By the time she got copies, the hearing had already happened, and the board had voted to uphold the fine. I asked her if she had kept any of her evidence. She said she had everything in a box in her garage, including the original complaint forms, the hearing minutes, and a certified letter from the management company admitting they had misplaced her first 2 requests. She offered to scan it all and email it to me tonight. I asked her why she never pushed harder. She said she was exhausted and scared, and Judith had made it clear that fighting the HOA would only make things worse. Elena said Judith told her the management company would back her because nobody wanted paperwork, and Elena believed it. I told her I was going to reopen her case and use it to destroy Judith's credibility. Elena was quiet for a long time, then she said she would help however she could. That night, Elena sent me 43 pages of scanned documents. I printed everything and added it to my binder. The complaint forms were identical to mine, right down to the template layout and the blank signature lines. The hearing minutes showed that Judith had presented the complaints as community consensus, but none of the neighbors who supposedly signed them were present at the hearing. The certified letter from the management company was dated 6 weeks after Elena's first records request, and it admitted that her packets had been misfiled twice. I now had a verified timeline that collapsed Judith's entire narrative. The next step was figuring out how to deploy it. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA tales. I spent Thursday building my presentation. I printed 2 copies of everything, one for me and one for the hearing. I organized the timeline into a packet with tabs for each piece of evidence, and I highlighted the key contradictions in yellow. The mystery chat account, the identical complaint forms, the canceled tow request, the missing records requests, and the pattern across 2 separate cases 3 years apart. I labeled the packet cold case evidence and put it in a clear binder so the pages would not get mixed up. Then I called Greg again and asked him to confirm the tow authorization details if I called him during the hearing. He said he would do it, but only if I kept his name out of any formal complaints. I agreed. Thursday night, Judith called me. She did not identify herself, just started talking like we were mid-conversation. She said the hearing was scheduled for Friday at 6 p.m. in the clubhouse, and I was required to bring proof of compliance or pay the fine before the hearing started. I asked her what proof of compliance meant. She said I needed to provide a written statement from my employer confirming I would not park work vehicles in my driveway overnight, plus a photo of my driveway empty at midnight for 7 consecutive nights. I told her that was not in the original notice. She said the requirements had been updated based on my lack of cooperation. I asked her when the update was posted. She said it was sent to my email yesterday. I checked my inbox and found nothing. I told her that. She said it must have gone to spam and hung up. I forwarded the call log to my lawyer friend Sam and asked if moving goalposts like that was legal. He said it was not, and it could be grounds for a procedural challenge. He offered to attend the hearing as an observer. I accepted. Friday morning, I woke up to another email from the management company. It said my records request had been processed and the file was available for pickup. I had already picked up my file 2 days ago, so I called Dan and asked what was going on. He said they had found additional documents in a misfiled folder and I could pick them up anytime. I told him I would be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, the receptionist handed me a second folder. Inside was a single page, a signed complaint form with my address, dated 2 months ago, with a signature that was illegible but clearly not blank. I stared at it. This was new. I asked the receptionist where this had been filed. She said it was in a supplemental folder that got separated during the portal rebuild. I asked her when it was scanned into the system. She checked her screen and said it was uploaded this morning. I took a photo of the page and the metadata timestamp on her screen. Then I asked to see the original paper form. She said it was already been sent back to storage. I asked where storage was. She said it was off-site and retrieval required a formal request. I thanked her and left. In my car, I looked at the photo. The signature was a scribble, but the ink color was different from the date ink, and the handwriting style did not match any of the neighbors I knew. I texted Marcus and asked if he recognized the signature. He said it looked like Judith's handwriting trying to look like someone else's. I added the photo to my evidence packet and labeled it Exhibit F, Forged Signature. The hearing was in 6 hours. I went home and rehearsed my presentation. I practiced staying calm, speaking clearly, and presenting the timeline so the facts were undeniable, even to people who hate drama. I did not plan to accuse Judith of fraud outright. I just planned to show the evidence and let the board draw their own conclusions. At 5:30, Sam picked me up and we drove to the clubhouse. Judith was already there, setting up a projector and arranging papers on the head table. She was wearing the same pink blazer, and her retractable badge reel swung every time she moved. She saw me walk in and smiled. "You are early," she said. "I hope you brought your compliance proof." I held up my binder and said I brought evidence. Her smile faded slightly, but she recovered and told me to sit in the audience section. The board members started arriving. 3 other homeowners I recognized from neighborhood events, plus a management company rep I had never seen before. Judith took her seat at the head table and called the meeting to order. Judith started by reading the violation notice aloud. Then she presented the complaint form with the forged signature. She said the complaint had been filed by a concerned neighbor who wished to remain anonymous, and the HOA had a duty to enforce the rules consistently. She said I had been given multiple opportunities to comply, and my refusal to cooperate demonstrated a pattern of disregard for community standards. I raised my hand. Judith ignored me and kept talking. She said the fine was justified under the bylaws, and if I refused to pay, the HOA would pursue further enforcement action, including potential liens. One of the board members, a woman named Carol, interrupted and asked if I had been given written notice before the fine was issued. Judith said yes, and she pointed to the email she claimed to have sent. Carol asked if I had received it. I said no, and I checked my spam folder. Judith said that was not the HOA's problem. Carol frowned and said the bylaws required proof of delivery. Judith said the management company portal crash had affected email logs, so proof of delivery was unavailable. The management company rep, a man named Paul, shifted in his seat and said that was not accurate. He said the email logs were intact, and there was no record of any email being sent to my address. Judith's face went red. She said Paul was mistaken, and she would provide the logs after the meeting. Paul said he had the logs right now, and he could share them if the board wanted. Carol said yes, please. Paul pulled out his laptop and showed the screen to the board. There was no email. Judith clicked her pen 3 times and said the email must have been sent from her personal account. Carol asked why she would use a personal account for official HOA business. Judith said it was more efficient. Carol said it was not compliant with the bylaws. Judith said the bylaws were guidelines, not requirements. Carol said that was not how bylaws worked. I stood up and asked if I could present my evidence. Judith said no, the hearing was not a trial. Carol said I had a right to respond to the complaint. Judith said I could submit a written response after the hearing. Carol said that was not acceptable, and she wanted to hear what I had to say. Judith slammed her clipboard on the table. "The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I," she said. Carol looked at the other board members. One of them, a man named Jeff, said he wanted to hear my evidence. The third board member, a woman named Linda, nodded. Judith clicked her pen again and said fine, but I had 5 minutes. I walked to the front of the room and opened my binder. I started with the timeline. I showed the board the mystery chat post from 2 months ago. Then I showed them the identical post from 3 years ago in Elena's case. I explained that both posts were made at 11:47 p.m., exactly 2 months before each hearing, and both were from the same account that had no other activity. I showed them the complaint forms with the blank signature lines and the mismatched ink dates. I showed them the certified letter from the management company admitting they had lost Elena's records requests twice. Then I showed them the tow authorization log. I called Greg on speaker and asked him to confirm the details. He said a tow request was logged for my address 2 weeks ago and canceled the same day. I asked him who canceled it. He said the caller ID showed Summit Ridge HOA. I asked him if the cancellation note mentioned issuing a warning first. He said yes. I thanked Greg and hung up. Then I showed the board the forged signature on the complaint form that was uploaded this morning. I pointed out that the ink color did not match the date ink, and the metadata showed it was scanned into the system at 9:14 a.m. today, 6 hours before the hearing. I said the signature looked like Judith's handwriting trying to look like someone else's, and I invited the board to compare it to Judith's other documents. Judith stood up and said I was making baseless accusations. I said I was presenting facts. Carol asked Judith if she had requested a tow authorization. Judith said no. I played a voicemail I had saved from Greg earlier that week, where he confirmed the request. Judith said the voicemail was fabricated. Sam stood up and said he was an attorney, and he could arrange for a subpoena of the tow company's records if the board wanted independent verification. Judith clicked her pen 4 times and said this was a witch hunt. Linda, the third board member, said it sounded like Judith had lied multiple times tonight. Jeff said he wanted to see the rule Judith kept citing about overnight work vehicles. I pulled up the bylaws on my phone and read the section aloud. It said the board must provide written notice and allow 14 days for compliance before issuing a fine. I said I had never received written notice, and the complaint form was backdated to create a false paper trail. Carol asked Paul if the management company had any record of a written notice being sent to my address. Paul checked his laptop and said no. Carol asked Judith why she had skipped the notice requirement. Judith said the requirement only applied to first-time violations, and I was a repeat offender. I said I had never been cited before, and my compliance file only had 1 entry. Paul confirmed that was correct. Judith said the file was incomplete because of the portal crash. Paul said the portal crash did not delete existing records. It only affected access logs. Judith said Paul was lying to cover up the management company's incompetence. Paul said he was not going to sit here and be accused of lying, and he stood up to leave. Carol asked him to stay. He sat back down. Carol asked if anyone in the audience wanted to speak. A neighbor named Angela stood up and said Judith had pressured her to sign a complaint form about my van 3 weeks ago, but Angela had refused because she did not have a problem with it. Angela said Judith told her the form was just a formality and the board would handle it quietly, but Angela did not trust her. Another neighbor, a man named Tom, stood up and said Judith had done the same thing to him 2 years ago about a fence, and he had signed the form because she made it sound mandatory. He said he regretted it. Judith said both of them were lying. Angela said she had text messages from Judith. Carol asked to see them. Angela pulled out her phone and showed the board a screenshot. The message said, "Sign the complaint form and I will make sure this does not turn into a big issue." Angela said she never signed. Jeff asked Judith if she had sent that message. Judith said it was taken out of context. Carol asked what the context was. Judith did not answer. She clicked her pen 5 times and said the board was wasting time on conspiracy theories instead of enforcing the rules. Linda said the only conspiracy here was Judith's pattern of fabricating complaints and manipulating records. Carol said she agreed. Jeff said he wanted to table the fine and open an investigation into Judith's conduct. Carol said she would second that motion. Linda said she would vote yes. Judith said they did not have the authority to investigate her. Carol said the bylaws gave the board full authority to investigate any officer for misconduct. Judith said she would resign before she let them humiliate her. Carol said that was her choice. Judith grabbed her clipboard and her badge reel and walked out. The door slammed behind her. The room was silent for a moment. Then Carol said the board would vote on the motion to table the fine. All three voted yes. Carol said the fine was dropped pending the investigation, and I was free to go. Sam shook my hand and said that was the most satisfying board meeting he had ever witnessed. I thanked him and started packing up my binder. Angela came over and said she was glad I had fought back. Tom said he wished he had done the same 2 years ago. I told them it was not too late to reopen his case if he wanted. He said he would think about it. The investigation took 3 weeks. The board hired an independent auditor to review all of Judith's enforcement cases from the past 5 years. The auditor found 12 cases with irregularities, blank signature lines, backdated complaints, missing notice records, and forged signatures. 4 of those cases involved fines that were paid under pressure, and the board voted to refund them with interest. The other 8 cases were tabled, and the violations were dropped. The auditor also found that Judith had been using her personal email account to communicate with the management company about enforcement actions, and she had deleted most of the emails before the investigation started. The board subpoenaed her email provider and recovered enough deleted messages to confirm that she had been pressuring neighbors to sign complaint forms and threatening retaliation if they refused. The management company fired Paul for enabling Judith's misconduct by ignoring red flags and misplacing records requests. Dan, the manager, issued a formal apology to me and Elena and offered to waive all management fees for a year as compensation. I accepted. Elena declined and said she just wanted her name cleared. The board voted to expunge her case from the HOA records and issue a public statement acknowledging the wrongful fine. Judith tried to fight the findings by claiming the auditor was biased, but the board ignored her. She threatened to sue for defamation, but her lawyer advised her that the evidence was too strong and a lawsuit would only make things worse. She sold her house and moved out of Summit Ridge 2 months later. The board called a special meeting to elect a new rules enforcement chair. Marcus volunteered and won by unanimous vote. He immediately proposed a new policy requiring all enforcement actions to include written notice, proof of delivery, and signed complaints with full names. The policy passed with no objections. A verified timeline packet was circulated to homeowners that collapsed Karen's narrative, and the neighborhood group chat exploded with comments. People who had been afraid to speak up before started sharing their own stories about Judith pressuring them to sign forms or threatening fines for minor issues. The board opened a hotline for complaints and received over 30 reports in the first week. At the next board meeting, a motion was introduced to recall the entire previous board for failing to oversee Judith's conduct. The motion passed, resignations cascaded, and new leadership took over. Carol, Jeff, and Linda all resigned voluntarily and apologized for not catching the pattern sooner. The new board implemented term limits and mandatory training for all officers. Judith tried to interrupt the recall vote by showing up at the meeting and demanding to speak, but the meeting voted anyway. The room laughed when she tried to cite the bylaws, and Marcus calmly read the section that said recalled officers have no speaking privileges. She left before the vote was finalized. The HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess, and the management company settled with Elena and the other homeowners who had been wrongfully fined. Judith was outvoted so hard the room laughed, and she never showed her face at another Summit Ridge event. I kept my evidence binder in a filing cabinet in case anyone ever tried to pull the same scheme again. Marcus told me he had done the same thing with Elena's documents, and he was building a library of enforcement cases so future homeowners could fact-check any suspicious complaints. The new board approved funding for a digital record system with audit logs and timestamp submissions, so nothing could be backdated or deleted without leaving a trail. Elena came back to Summit Ridge 6 months later for a neighborhood barbecue. She thanked me for reopening her case and said it felt good to have her name cleared. She said she had been carrying guilt and frustration for 3 years, and the public statement from the board finally gave her closure. I told her she deserved justice, and I was glad I could help. The supplier audit went fine, and I kept my contract. My restaurant shifts stayed long, but I did not have to worry about losing a day to HOA nonsense anymore. The new board was professional, transparent, and reasonable, and enforcement actions dropped by 70% in the first year, because people were not afraid to talk to their neighbors anymore, instead of filing complaints. Judith's house sold to a young couple with 2 kids. They asked me about the neighborhood during a chance encounter at the hardware store, and I told them Summit Ridge was a good place to live now. They moved in 2 weeks later and never had a single problem with the HOA. I still see Marcus at neighborhood events, and we laugh about the file cart that proved everything. He kept a photo of Judith's face during the recall vote, and he framed it with the caption, "The moment paperwork and vibes lost to receipts." It hangs in his garage next to his toolbox. Summit Ridge Association is still standing, and the rules are still enforced, but now they are enforced fairly. The new board sends written notices, allows time for compliance, and investigates complaints before issuing fines. Nobody gets pressured to sign forms, and nobody gets towed without proper authorization. The neighborhood group chat is still active, but now it is mostly people sharing recipes and organizing block parties instead of accusing each other of violations. I still wear my work gloves when I am dealing with HOA business, not because I need them, but because they remind me that I fought back and won. I did not let Judith and her paperwork and vibes intimidate me into paying a fine I did not owe, and I did not let the management company bury the cold case that proved she had been framing people for years. The tow company changed their policy and now requires written authorization with a board signature before dispatching for HOA requests. Greg told me he got a commendation for flagging the irregularities in Judith's requests, and he used the recognition to push for better training across the company. He said my case made him realize how easy it was for HOAs to abuse their power, and he wanted to make sure his company was not enabling it anymore. I hope your notices stay non-existent.